So good morning, and thank you very much for this nice invitation here to the School of Arts in Hasselt. AI is not only changing academic careers and the writing of seminar papers, but artificial intelligence is now becoming also quite creative in the arts. A new genre of art is emerging, which I call AI art, and by this I mean any kind of art created with the help of AI algorithms. Perhaps the most challenging philosophical question is, how does AI art differ from art made with human intelligence? I will start with the general question, what does it mean to understand art, before I then ask the special question, what does it mean to understand AI art? My presentation will be structured in 4 steps. First, I will introduce you to the system theoretical concept of understanding. Secondly, I would like to give you a brief instruction manual for the use of AI programs or AI art programs. And thirdly, I want to outline a model of aesthetic modernism which can be used to better assess the artistic character of AI art. And finally, I will discuss examples of AI art. That's the program. The sociologist Niklas Luhmann developed a tripartite concept of communication, according to which communication is a threefold selection of information, message, and understanding. In other words, a threefold contingency comes into play in every communication. Accordingly, the model draws attention to the unlikelihood that any communication and any understanding takes place at all. Furthermore, there are 2 abstract communication partners in this model, which Luhmann calls alter and ego. So let's take an example. One person says to another, "The sun is shining." The first selection means that this is a relevant observation for the communication. All other observations are of no importance in this context. There is a second selection in the way this information is communicated. This statement can be made casually, with an ironic undertone, or with an angry voice. In our case, the information should be expressed with surprise. So the sentence would sound something like this: "The sun is shining." Finally, a third selection is required because this information must also be understood on the basis of the message associated with it. Understanding therefore requires interpreting the distinction between information and message. Let's say a couple is spending their vacation on a beach, and the woman's message, "The sun is shining," is understood by the man as an invitation to go swimming. However, since communication consists of selections, misunderstandings are inevitable. Let's assume that the 2 of them had a conversation in the morning about the weather being bad and that they can't go to the beach. They agree that they would rather do some shopping instead, but they must not forget their umbrellas. In this case, there exist 2 contexts of understanding in this specific communication. The context "go swimming" and the context "go shopping." If the man selects context 2, then he could also understand the message "the sun is shining" as a statement by the woman that they don't need to take an umbrella to the shops. So much for the general system theoretical approach to communication. From here we can also deduce what is special about art communication. Basically, we can say that art communication is communication done through artwork. What changes in art communication compared to everyday communication, however, is that the artist disappears behind his work. The artist becomes the gray shadow of his work, which communicates independently of him once the artwork is in the world. Luhmann once aptly described art communication as compact communication. The term conveys very nicely that the combination of forms in an artwork already contains the communication possibilities that it releases when it views. In other words, works of art store a potential for communication in a more or less compressed way. So much for the underlying communication theory. Next, I would like to give you an instruction manual for creating AI art. It is the same set of instruction that I gave my students in the art philosophy course in Luxembourg to prepare an homework assignment in AI art. The seminar paper consisted of 3 parts. First, generate an AI image using a prompt. Second, write down the prompt. Third, find a suitable title for your AI image. As instruction example, I had generated this AI image myself, and then I had given the following additional instruction for the title search. Think of a title that transforms your AI image into AI art as much as possible. The key to the title search is that an explanatory gap arises between what the picture shows and what the caption says. However, this kind of performative contradiction should not be arbitrary, but it should stimulate an interpretation that is surprising, witty, sophisticated, or comical. Under no circumstances should the title say what the AI picture shows. That is, the AI artwork should not be representational. Of course, I had to ask myself what image would work for the students, and the obvious idea was to refer to background knowledge of students' own university. Here you can see a photo of the University of Luxembourg. In the foreground is the Humanities building. In the background you can see the remains of an old iron mill, which is located on the university campus. The contrast between the iron mill and the university building was the idea behind the AI picture. One could also say that it was the concept of this AI picture. My prompt accordingly read iron mill transformed into a university building, exemplifying the knowledge society amid a botanical garden. And the last point was wishful thinking, because there exist almost no trees on the campus. Strictly speaking, however, a prompt does not belong to an AI artwork. So how do you actually understand this picture without a title and without knowing the prompt? Of course, students would recognize their own university building. Everyone else will probably just see a neo-Gothic building, a park, chimneys, a factory, and a few flying birds. The message of this image is exhausted in the communication of this information, or rather, the message is that one sees here not reality, but a painting-like image. What can be understood from this picture is self-evident. However, if you zoom in on the birds depicted, you can still perceive a striking difference between information and message. Suddenly, you realize that these birds are false abstractions. When in classical paintings flying birds are depicted, with a few brush strokes, as the seagulls in Caspar David Friedrich's The Monk by the Sea, you won't find such obvious flaws in them. This means that the image can also be understood in a more specific way. So it is not just any picture, but an AI-generated image. AI images are extremely interesting for art philosophy because they represent a completely new way of creating pictures. But as soon as we get used to AI images, and there are more AI images in the universe than pictures, the meaning of our words changes. The concept of the AI images itself will become part of the concept of the picture. The difference between a picture and an AI picture will be a difference that is not longer worth understanding. The distinction between information and message can generally be emphasized by giving images a title. The title I came up with was Tuesday, the teaching stuff is flying in. So I hope you understood the title because you're part of the university. The more far-reaching question, however, is why should a big difference between information and message have a special value for art communication? This question can be answered by a model of aesthetic modernism that I developed and discussed in detail in the seminar, and that I can only summarize here very briefly, but you can find explanations on the YouTube channel. The crucial idea in this model is that modern art develops an autonomous art system in which art becomes so free that it negates its own traditional concept and thus enters into a mode of permanent outdoing, or in other words, into a logic of negation. Novelty is generated by a systematic negation of the old, that is of an already prevailing understanding of what art is. In the 20th century, this logic of negation leads to an internal differentiation of art communication, resulting in the well-known major caesuras in modern art history. First, there is a break between the fine arts and classical modernism. A similar rupture can be observed between the art of classical modernism and the anti-works of the historical avant-garde. There is also an immediately perceptible caesura between avant-garde and postmodern art. And finally, aesthetic postmodernism is today being replaced by an epochal style that I would like to call reflexive modernism. The entire process of differentiation consisted of a decoupling of the three essential components of art communication, that is, of work, medium, and of concept. These three entities belong to the basic vocabulary of any art communication and can therefore also be rejected in discourses about art. In the 19th century art, these three components formed an inseparable whole. In the art communication of the 21st century, these three components have largely decoupled. In the model, this decoupling process is graphically represented by the gaps between medium, work, and concept. The question I'm particularly concerned with in connection with AI art is how does art communication and the understanding of artworks change as a result of this history of differentiation? Or to put it in the other way around, how do we understand the fine art of the 19th century differently from the reflexive art of the 21st century. The model can be made plausible by constructing so-called historical series. In a historical series, the subject is left unchanged as far as possible, so that the major caesuras in modern art can be perceived in direct comparison. In the present case, the subject has been narrowed down to portraits, but of course you can also construct historical series of still lifes or of landscapes. My first example of fine art is Albrecht Dürer's self-portrait. By medium M, we specifically mean the medium of fine arts, which intensifies the experience of beauty by increasing order and contrast in the image. Insofar, the medium of painting is defined by the principle of representation, central perspective, symmetries, the golden section, and strong contrasts. In this example, the use of the medium is evident. We have a symmetrical composition of the image. We have a triangular shape formed by the shoulder-long hair, and the natural ornament of the gorgeous curls intensifies the aesthetic experience of beauty. The art of classical modernism is characterized by the negation of the medium of the fine arts and a visible rejection of the aesthetic value of beauty. This abandonment of the medium is compensated by the fact that a specific concept defines now how the aesthetic material in the picture should be organized instead. The concept of expressionism, as you see it in this self-portrait of Carl Schmidt-Rottluff, is to increase the eventfulness of the image. Classical modern art, which no longer aspires after beauty, relies on alternative aesthetic values, such as the aesthetic event, the aesthetic ambivalence, and the aesthetic sublime, but in a very purified form. The most radical way of this self-negation of art by the means of art consists in the negation of the premise that art always appears in the form of a work of art. This is particularly evident in Fontana's picture because he doesn't paint on the canvas, but he cuts it up. In the historical avant-garde, art is reduced to a concept C, which ultimately gave rise to the genre of conceptual art. The idea or the trick of this model is that even where the arts have reached such a zero point as with Fontana, the logic of outdoing can be perpetuated. Aesthetic postmodernism can also be understood as a negation of a premise that was constitutive of the historical avant-garde. In other words, postmodern art emerges from the negation of the medium of the fine art, which took place in classical modernism. More specifically, this means that painting is once again working with the means of representation and that new music or art music is once again composed tonally. None of this happens naively, however, but with the help of quotations and with the help of irony, as you can see in Roy Lichtenstein's work. This concept-driven use of the media also leads to new possibilities. You can now choose which style or which ism from the entire repertoire of art history you want to use. And finally, the epochal style of aesthetic postmodernism can also be overcome, as in Tymann's work. Here, the painting style and isms are not merely quoted. They do not remain aesthetic material for the postmodern play. Rather, the painting styles are used now as a means of expression to evoke an aesthetic content. In other words, a second double negation occurs. In this case, it is the negation of the category of the work, which took place in the avant-garde, which was once rejected in the historical avant-garde with its conceptualism. Here, neither the concept defines the content of the work, nor does the medium have the function of traditional art to directly express, reinforce, or affirm the content of the artwork. This is why the model now shows a gap, not only between concept and medium, but also a gap between concept and work. The number of selections that must be made increases exponentially if you want to communicate by means of such reflexive art. In Timann's Himmler, the first thing you see is that's what the title suggests, a portrait of the Reichsführer of the SS standing in front of a white wall that casts a shadow image. If you then look at the picture more closely, however, you can see an armband and the characteristic Hitler haircut from behind in these shadows, which is quite strange because a real shadow cannot reproduce such details. Ergo, you don't see a shadow, but it is Hitler standing behind Himmler. Timann takes a look at the back of power, showing us a man covering Hitler's back with the help of the SS and Gestapo. Such a picture puzzle about power relations, which exploit a simple perceptual ambivalence of painting, can only be created in an art genre that has become reflexive. There are three further important aspects that can be added in this model. On the one hand, this history of differentiation involves a paradigm shift from material aesthetics to Gehalt aesthetics. And a brief note to the meaning of the word Gehalt is a German word which I use in English because it's not translatable. Gehalt is an aesthetic category in the German aesthetic discourse, which is used already by Hegel and by Adorno, and stands for a content that is not simply present in an artwork, but it's created by an interpretation of the artwork. So that's the difference between content and Gehalt. Right up to the historical avant-garde, newness in modern art was always defined in terms of the aesthetic material. The aim was to achieve material progress, either by inventing new isms or by reducing the aesthetic material to an absolute minimum through abstraction. With postmodern art, a counter-movement then sets in, and newness is increasingly defined in terms of new aesthetic Gehalt. The second aspect that can be seen in this history model is that this paradigm shift from material aesthetics to Gehalt aesthetics runs through the conceptual arts. The third aspect of this model concerns the gaps between medium, work, and concept, and that is the most important aspect for today, these gaps can be understood as a new degree of freedom in art communication. Accordingly, the space for creativity in art has increased considerably compared to the fine arts in the 19th century. In view of this historical model, how has art communication and thus also the understanding of artworks changed in the 20th century? To what extent does Dürer's self-portrait require a different understanding than Timann's Himmler? This brings me to my crucial theoretical step in this lecture. I will link the model of aesthetic modernism with Luhmann's theory of communication. The three basic components of art communication, medium, concept, and work, are in fact special cases of Luhmann's three components of communication. Every artwork has an information component that establishes that we are dealing with art and provides recipients with more specific background knowledge. In art communication, this source of information takes the form of concepts. On the one hand, these art concepts consist of explicit linguistic attributions as they are made by picture titles. However, the conceptual core of an artwork also includes what you can immediately perceive from it. The information of an artwork is as self-evident as any information in the live world. The concepts therefore also cover, in the original sense of the Italian word concetto, the thematic idea. The concept-based information is then transformed by the medium into an art-specific message. So we have a link between concept and information and a link between medium and message. The artwork itself synthesizes both the self-evident information and the medium-specific message into an artificial unity. And this difference between information and message stored in the artwork must then be understood. This is the link between the category of the work and Luhmann's notion of understanding. In Dürer's self-portrait, therefore, it is not only the title that it's part of the picture's concept and information component, but also the fact that one immediately recognizes a man with curls in a fur coat. By contrast, the message of the painting lies in the specific aesthetic appearance of Dürer, who presents himself as a beautiful, rich and noble figure who looks like Jesus. The self-portrait can then be understood as an self-aggrandizement of the artist, in which the newly forming class of the bourgeoisie makes its first appearance. If medium, work and concept can be decoupled in reflexive art and combined with each other, then this means for art communication in general that the selection possibilities multiply. The information component of Timon's picture would be that the man depicted is identifiable as Heinrich Himmler. The message of the image, which is generated with the modern means of ambivalence, then consists of the false shadow of that Himmler casts. And one way of understanding this difference between information and message would be to interpret it as a Janus face of Himmler and Hitler. So this brings me to my final point, namely understanding AI art. So that was the theoretical part, and now we come to a more practical part. If my model of aesthetic modernism represents a special case of Luhmann's theory of communication, then a far-reaching distinction can be derived from it. Namely, the distinction between strong art communication and weak art communication. The differentiation of word, medium, and concept increases the degree of freedom to create a difference between information and message. And this makes the understanding of art much more challenging. Strong art communication is therefore characterized by an increased demand for making selections. In other words, you have to choose from many more possibilities. By contrast, weak art communication takes place when the difference between information and message remains relatively small. In principle, there are also three selections in weak art communication, but you need much less prior knowledge and much less time to play through the available combination possibilities. It is precisely because of this lack of choice that weak art communication is self-evident and immediately accessible to a large audience. With this distinction between strong and weak art communication in mind, let's take a look at some AI art examples. Here you can see 4 AI images that were generated by the AI program ICANN in 2018. The machine independently selects the style, the composition, colors, the texture of the images it is generating. It is a program that was developed by the computer scientist Amit Elgamal. ICANN can generate thousands and thousands of such abstract images without human intervention, and in this case, it works autonomously. Of course, the images which are presented as art are still selected by a human. But what is remarkable about this program is that it passed a blind test with abstract painting from Art Basel 2016. These 4 pictures did not initially have a title. However, when such AI images are shown in a gallery, or like these pictures here, at the Art Basel Miami art fair, they are automatically marked as art. The message of such AI-generated works is accordingly that they are art. The innovative aspect of these works is essentially a technical aspect, that an artificial intelligence can autonomously produce such images for the first time in art history. Beyond that, however, there is little that is surprising to understand. It is therefore a case of weak art communication. The next logical step was to give these AI images a title. This picture in the style of Kurt Schwitters is called St. George Killing a Dragon. The computer scientist becomes an artist insofar as he is named as the author of the work. What was most spectacular, however, was the fact that this AI image was auctioned for $16,000. As a pioneering work in AI arts, this sum is probably also an appropriate price. In terms of the visual language itself, however, the work offers little that is new. It draws on the aesthetic of classical modernism, which is exactly the kind of work ICANN was trained on before. Even with the additional title, the art communication is offered has hardly changed. The image does not create a difference between information and message that can be meaningfully understood. What we have here is more a kind of naming. With a lot of imagination, it is possible to see St. George and a dragon in the picture, which makes the artistic character of the picture a little bit stronger. Ultimately, however, the only thing that you can understand about this work is that this abstract form combination is a symbol of a myth. In other words, it is representational art in the formal language of classical modernism, and thus belongs more to the field of weak art communication. The latest developments in style-imitating AI arts include programs such as Midjourney, which can generate images from verbal instructions. With the help of a corresponding prompt, Jason Allen, who was previously not an artist and has no artistic training, created this picture in 2022. Most notably, the picture won a first prize at the art fair in Colorado. The title could be translated as Space Opera Theater, but even this designation does not create a complex art communication, but rather fulfills an enigmatic function. Jason Allen is merely imitating an art strategy that is also widespread in analog art. The enigmatic title serves primarily to emphasize the artistic character of the AI work. In principle, this image mutually reinforces two expectations of what is art. On the one hand, the cliché of a classical painting in the Rembrandt style is imitated. On the other hand, the cliché that art is mysterious is added. The success of the painting was probably due to the fact that it created a link to the genre of science fiction. This produces the strange effect that this genre of popular culture is elevated to high culture through the classical art form of painting. This AI image too enables only weak art communication. The enigmatic title and the antique-like robes of the information provided by the images. The enigmatic title and the antique-like robes are part of the information provided by the image. But the medium of the image, which constitutes the message, is exhausted by the effect of recognizing that this is a classical painting, as we know it from art history museums. Information and message more or less coincide and only indicate to the recipient that this AI image is supposed to be art. Personally, I think the decision to award the work with a prize was the right one. The work has the advantage over its many analog counterparts that it is technologically innovative. And in addition, it makes the implication of AI arts in the art system visible. The mass dissemination of AI art will inevitably lead to an economic and symbolic devaluation of weak art communication. And this devaluation also affects analog art. Until now, many forms of weak art communication have been able to retain their status as high-priced, high-culture art because they were traded as a scarcity on a scarcity market of art fairs and galleries. In an economy of abundance, as AI art will bring with it, both analog and digital forms of weak art communication will be developed and transformed into genres of popular culture, I think. Helena Zarin took some photos in the department store Bed Bath & Beyond, trained an AI program with them, and produced then AI images, as you can see here. She then selected some of these images and arranged them into a grid, creating this aesthetically attractive and interesting visual work. What I especially like about this picture is the ironic title. Everyday household items from the department store Bed Bath & Beyond become abstract art, that is, something way beyond ordinary life. With her witty title, Zarin has deliberately increased the difference between information and message, so that the art communication triggered by her work is stronger than in the previous AI art examples. The painter Chris Peters trained an AI with landscape paintings of tonalism, a romanticizing style of painting that had developed in America between 1880 and 1915. He then selected some of these AI images and painted them himself with oil paint on canvas. In the logic of the art system, it is considered kitsch if Peters is still painting in this old-fashioned style today, what he actually does. For that conservatism, you need at least a good aesthetic reason or artistic reason. That is, a strong concept, such as using an AI image or using AI as an image generator. In the 21st century, a landscape painting in the style of tonalism can trigger only weak art communication, whereas the same painting that is copied from an AI image represents a much stronger form of art communication. This leads me back to my homework assignment. AI art not only demystifies weak art communication, but it will also promote the spread of strong art communication. My own example has no claim to be art by itself, but it was intended to be an instructive example for the students. However, I actually received quite excellent works from the students. For example, Clu Laville's The American Dream. The American Dream becomes an image concept here. The inspiration for this AI image may have come from Kundera's essay on kitsch, which we discussed in the seminar before. Kundera wrote in the 6th chapter of his novel The Unbearable Lightness of Being, quote, "Kitsch evokes two tiers of emotion flowing side by side. The first tier says, 'How beautiful are children running on the grass.' The second tier says, 'How beautiful it is to be moved together with the entire humankind watching children running on the grass.'" Precisely this kitschy motif of children running on the grass, which is reinforced by a colorful aesthetic, is nullified by a strong visual concept, a concept that the AI has implemented with two digital brushstrokes that suggest barrels of guns. Evelyn Booth's The Very Last Supper takes up one of the best-known motifs in the history of Western art, but gives it a new twist, both in the depiction and in the title. The apostles of our time are sitting in front of their whiskey glasses and turning their backs to the viewer. It is no longer a scene that establishes Christianity as a religion, but it seems to be the very last act in the history of civilization. The dinner party is watched by a divine eye as the protagonists face their doom. The so-called free play of imagination and reason that Kant once spoke of is particularly stimulated by such prompt-generated AI art. On the one hand, image ideas can now be visualized without much technical effort and delay. On the other hand, such AI images are always different from what you might expect. As a result, the imagination is automatically stimulated to find an inspiring title for the surprising picture. When Kant's free play of imagination and reason can crystallize in the compact communication of such work, then one is dealing with a case of strong art communication. Laetitia Laville's Butterflies in the Cell Phone, Falling in Love in the 21st Century is a striking example of how AI art opens doors to anyone with good ideas. Here, the popular motif of the museum visitor taking pictures is taken up and transformed to the proverbial phrase to have butterflies in your stomach, butterflies which can neither be seen nor photographed. Today, the butterflies' feelings fly through the digital image culture. They create a surrogate of love in the same way that the Mona Lisa in the Louvre depicts in millions of photographs became an art surrogate. In the 21st century, anyone who falls in love will first play with this simulacra of love on their cell phones. So, when students in their second semester of philosophy who have never before dealt with AI art can spontaneously produce this kind of art, then you know that what kind of potential for change lies in this technology. AI art generally leads to a democratization of the art system. With this technology, more players will enter the game. But we also can see that AI art not only produces more weak, but also more strong art communication. In many areas of the art system, surplus markets will emerge in which all participants equally claim to create art. This will provoke a need for differentiation. And my suggestion is one such differentiation. So the distinction between strong and weak art communication is an analytical distinction that responds to an emerging complexity problem. The strong forms of art communication undoubtedly have a clear preference for difficulty and for complexity. And of course, one can ask oneself, what is the point of this? The obvious answer would be that you are less likely to get bored with complex and difficult art. But the question also arises at the level of the society. And here my hypothesis would be that strong art communication fulfills a specific reflexive function in liberal democracies. It provokes a rewriting of self-descriptions in society that have become outdated and which have become dysfunctional. But this is another theory about contemporary art, and I thank you very much for your attention.